Okay, so this new pipeline, like it's going to be larger, longer? Like, explain this to me.
So the existing pipeline is 300,000 barrels a day.
Okay.
Of that, 100,000 barrels goes to 2 refineries in Washington State for their consumption. It splits Sumas Mountain in Abbotsford, and there's a spur that goes down to Washington, which
Okay.
leaves 200,000 barrels that goes to a mixture of about 100,000 barrels to the airport and about 50,000 barrels to the refinery and 50,000 barrels to the terminal. So of the 300,000 barrels, about 50,000 ends up on tankers, about 50 to
Okay.
70,000 barrels. So what Kinder Morgan wants to do now is they want to build a new pipeline that would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 400,000 or 500,000 barrels a day, which would make the total capacity 700,000 or 800,000 barrels a day, and all of that will be for export. So we'd be going for 50,000 barrels to something like 600,000 barrels being exported through our inlet, and the vast
So it's going to
majority
be like
of that,
guzzling
yeah,
out.
you're
And
talking
so,
like about 300 to 400 tankers in the inlet, as opposed to annually, as opposed to right now we've seen an increase from 20 to 80, but this would bring us up to 300 or 400.
like, I don't know, I've never seen like how this all works. So when you're talking about a pipeline and they're building a new one,
Yes.
is this like underground? What is it attached to? Where is it going? That kind of.
So it would run from Alberta, and would carry oil through a new pipeline that would be built. They'd have to dig about a 30-foot hole
Okay.
in terms of its width, as well as staging grounds and access roads and any number of other things, potentially power lines, to get this new pipeline constructed. Excuse me, and it would run all the way from Alberta, through the kind of general Kamloops area, down through the Fraser Valley, through.
So does that disrupt like local communities there with the building of it? Never mind, whatever else with the oil or whatever
Yeah.
they're passing through there.
Well, I mean, I think if this company thinks they're going to have an easy time getting this built, they are sorely mistaken. I mean, the original pipeline was built in 1952. There's, very different, sort of level of community
Awareness
there.
and whatever.
Well, and also just a lot more homes and farms and factories. And
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
like you're talking about going through golf courses and people's farms and people's backyards. I mean, like, Burnaby, Langley, Chilliwack, Abbotsford, Kamloops. I mean, you're talking about a lot of communities that,
Aren't
literally
gonna-
are going to be, would you like a 30-foot hole in the middle of your backyard, let alone the risk of an even greater risk of an oil spill?
Yeah.
I don't think most people would. So it's going to be a very tough pipeline to build. As much as there's a lot of good reasons why people are concerned about the Enbridge pipeline, both of these have significant reasons for concern. And in this case, you're actually talking about going through extremely heavily populated areas.
So I thought we were running out of the crude. Right. So why so much increase now? I mean, I know you said money, but why?
Well,
why push it so much if we're running out of the crude?
Well, I think actually the reason why there's so much interest in what we have in Canada is just that. We're running out of the stuff that bubbles to the surface, right? Like it's not, the days where you could drill a hole and oil would come spurting out of the ground are long gone. And what we're left with is deep underground, very hard to access, and Canada's got one of the last big reserves of it. And as we run out of it, the price is going through the roof. It's actually dropped in the last week or so, but I mean, it's only been economically viable to extract oil from the bitumen in Alberta, when it was about $50 a barrel, which really, we got there because of limited supply. The demand was drastically outstripping the supply. Now oil's hovering around $100 a barrel. It goes up and down, but it only really became profitable at that price point. And it was in the early 2000s, like 2001 to 2003, that we really started seeing drastic increases in what was being extracted from Alberta. So as we haven't really kicked our fossil fuel addiction, the sources of that oil, especially from countries that aren't nationalized oil fields in Saudi Arabia or in Venezuela. Mm-hmm. I mean, Canada is one of the only places left that's a quote unquote friendly Western democracy where you can actually get access to large quantities of oil. But the big choke point is these pipelines. They can't get the oil to market without building them.
So, and what will it mean with increased tankers, and what's your fear of what will happen if this all comes to be?
Well, I guess it's twofold. I mean, the sort of most immediate top of mind threat for most people is an oil spill. And when it comes to pipelines and tankers, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when there'll be a spill. And we've seen this in the last 2 months. We've had 3 oil spills in Alberta alone. And of course, these things happen on a quite regular basis. In the last decade, there's been about 2,000 pipeline incidents. Both natural gas and oil pipelines have ruptured. Some smaller than some bigger, but I mean, these things happen quite regularly. And many people are actually concerned that as we've been moving to this heavier crude, that the likelihood of incidents is actually potentially increasing because it's much more corrosive, heavier oil. So most immediate concern is an oil spill. I mean, if you had a spill in the Fraser River at the headwaters, I mean, it could affect thousands of people, some of the most important habitat for salmon, and any number of other sort of related health concerns for people living downstream. Or a spill off the coast could be extremely devastating to our ecosystems and our tourism economy, and you name it. Property values in British Columbia, to just as sort of a top of mind issue, but I mean the sort of longer term ecological issues would be quite devastating. But then I think even if there wasn't a spill, and I mean there will be at some point, I'm sure, smaller and bigger incidents, but even if there never was, we're still spilling all that carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and all that pollution into our bodies by burning this stuff. The Onion News Network, my favorite sort of funny news network, did this kind of mock news story where they said that there'd been a horrible incident where an oil tanker safely reached its final destination, and now that oil was all being spilled into the atmosphere. And this was right in the midst of the BP disaster, right when oil spills were really top of mind. And I thought that was a good sort of, I mean, as much as it was kind of a dark kind of comedy, it was an important reminder, I think, of how significant what we're doing is right now. We're treating the atmosphere as if it's sort of a dump site that you can just put unlimited amounts of pollution into and there won't be any consequences. And I mean, the United Nations and the world's leading scientists have got a pretty overwhelming consensus telling us that, we need to do something about this. Whether it's about the pollution or about the climate implications. I mean, even just living in a city with automobiles is like smoking half a pack of cigarettes a day in a city like Vancouver.
And doesn't it come down to that? I mean, isn't that what part of all this comes down to, is people aren't going to give up their cars. They're not in North America. They're not going to, not going to...
I would agree that people sure love their automobiles. I mean, I don't own a car, but I do like automobiles. I got nothing against autonomous mobility. I mean, I think we should be able to get from point A to point B. I think what we're going to see happen, though, is that every city is going to end up feeling and looking a lot like New York City in the not too distant future. I mean, as population growth increases, as everybody moves into urban centers, it's going to be harder and harder to get around in a single occupancy vehicle. Like, so whether it's about environmental concerns or just sort of economic, being difficult to purchase your own automobile as the economy shrinks, I think we're actually going to see a shift to people getting out of their cars simply because it isn't convenient. The question is, will we prepare by investing in the kind of public transit and light rail and the sort of infrastructure that actually helps people get from point A to point B, or will we not? And we've definitely seen in Europe and increasingly in Asia, there's been a big push towards that kind of investment in smarter transportation alternatives that reduce pollution, that increase quality of life, the walkability of your cities, and also get people out of their cars. But I don't necessarily think it'll be environmental concern that pushes us there. I think it'll actually just be population and sort of urbanization.
So what about the people who would raise it? Pipelines must mean jobs, especially maybe for local communities. How does that play out?
I mean, there's really not a lot of jobs for people in BC. There's construction jobs, no doubt about it, building a pipeline. But once you've got it built, you're not talking about a lot of jobs. It's like maybe a couple of dozen jobs. I had somebody once compared it to building a Walmart. It's about the same number of jobs to build it and about the same number of jobs to run it afterwards. And I mean, I'm not a big fan of Walmart, but personally, if I had to choose between Walmart and the risk of tar sands oil spilling in the Fraser River, I'd pick a Walmart. There's also way more jobs at stake. If you look at the sort of what is the heart and soul of the BC economy, I mean, so much of BC's branding, if I can use that dirty word, or just our property values, all the things that our BC economy depends on. Whether you look at the tourism aspects of it or just the appeal of British Columbia as this place that's filled with so much biodiversity and so much beauty. I mean, it just doesn't stand to reason that oil pipelines here are a good idea, or that turning our coast into an export facility for the oil sands is really congruent with what our brand or our sort of belief system in this province really is. So I think, I mean, if you really want to have a sincere conversation about the jobs, it's really about the jobs in Alberta, the tar sands jobs. And those are good paying jobs, and there's a fair number of them. But I mean, just because you can get a lot of jobs doing it doesn't mean it's a good idea. There's a lot of jobs, growing opium in Afghanistan, and we have no problem telling people that they shouldn't be doing that because of the harms associated with it. And that's a much poorer country than Canada, and that's one of the only forms of economy that they have. I mean, a country like Canada that's so wealthy and so developed can have alternatives, and really should. We really have no excuse to not be doing the responsible thing. And quite frankly, it's fundamentally irresponsible for us in this age of climate change to be a sort of a pusher of what we know to be harmful when we really know better and should be pushing for alternatives.
So are there any regulations? So is this strictly like free enterprise they'll be able to do? I mean, aside from what campaigning people can do, like, are there any regulations? Can government restrict this kind of thing or have any decision-making power in that?
Can and do are totally different things. I mean, what we're seeing right now is our federal government is basically acting like a bunch of lobbyists for the oil industry. I mean, if you look at what's happened in our most recent budget bill, I mean, the government's basically bending over backwards to try to make it as easy as possible to get pipelines approved. And they're even doing things that just seem completely insane. I mean, like shutting down the Coast Guard station in Kitsilano, getting the budgets for the people who do oil spill response cut so that there's now only people in Montreal and not in British Columbia anymore who are here to deal with oil spills. I mean, it's just crazy. There's also talk about changing the Fisheries Act to get rid of the protection of habitat for fish species. I mean, yeah, scary stuff. And I mean, it seems to me that our current Prime Minister is more than willing to spend all of his political and social capital on trying to get these projects pushed through. That's how significant I think he sees these projects. But it's overwhelmingly unpopular. There's definitely a lot that the government could do to better regulate these projects. I mean, even just the existing pipeline and the existing tanker traffic has got a huge risk. I mean, right now we've got 80 tankers a year going through Burrard Inlet, carrying 3 times as much as was spilled by the Exxon Valdez, and much more dangerous fuel. So, I mean, we should be doing a heck of a lot more just right now. There's an existing threat. And definitely that should be top of mind before we even consider an expansion.
And I think Harper also has made some changes to how groups like yours maybe can be deterred from being activists in situations like this. There's
this talk of going after the charitable status of and I mean, it's just, it's so blatantly political. I mean, at what point, Stephen Harper decided he wasn't a big fan of foreign direct investment from the United States, I'm not sure. I work for a group that doesn't happen to take a tremendous amount of money from big foundations, but I mean, I don't have anything against it. I think that, climate change is a global issue, and oil spill could affect people up and down the coast. I mean, personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with people investing in issues that they believe in, regardless of where they live. I mean, I support causes other places in the world because I care about what happens in the Amazon rainforest or wherever else, and I think people, are concerned about these issues, wherever they live, have every right to support them. I mean, it's just clearly politically motivated sort of spin doctoring, trying to take what is their weakness and make it a strength. I mean, obviously, this agenda is being pushed very much by the oil industry in the United States, by Houston and sort of these big oil companies. And to sort of point the finger at the environmental groups is taking a little bit of money from foundations who care about climate change or care about oil spills or care about trying to stop the tar sands and all the related impacts in Alberta. I mean, I just don't think it really holds up to reason, and anybody who really takes a look at it, it just doesn't pass the sniff test. It's pretty blatant.
We really are quickly running out of time. How can people get in touch with the Wilderness Committee and maybe get involved?
Well, I'm really easy to find on Facebook and Twitter, if you do that kind of thing. Just Ben West on Facebook or on Twitter. Also, you can go to our website, wildernesscommittee.org, and there's contact information there. We've got a tanker campaign page, which is wildernesscommittee.org/tankers. And there's a lot of information there. You can sign up for our mailing list and get more involved and more informed.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Okay, thank you.
Good night.